My name is Karlyn Borysenko, and you are listening to the Actively Unwoke podcast. You can pick up your copy of Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life at activelyunwoke.com. It is available in hardcover, in Kindle, and in an audio version read by me, the author, and I hope you enjoy it. Today, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to do a little bit of a crossover episode. You see, I have this Substack that I've been kind of playing with, just experimenting. I don't really know what I'm doing with it, but I'm trying to figure it out. It is a stream of conscious Substack where I'm basically writing about my red pill experience in a way that I just sit down at the computer. I write whatever is on my mind. I do not edit it. I do not go back and think about word choice or anything like that. It is a completely stream of conscious essay once it gets posted. It's called the Red Pill Diaries. You can find it at redpilldiaries.substack.com. And I wrote an essay last night that I think is really pertinent to fighting back against the woke insanity. It's something that every single person in this game needs to wrap their head around to truly understand why the woke are doing what they're doing. If we don't understand why our enemy is doing what they're doing, then we cannot possibly fight back against them because we're constantly going to be running into this barrier of not understanding their motivation. And if we don't understand their motivation, we can't understand where they're going, and we can't understand what tactics they're using, and we can't understand how to create obstacles for them, or to slow them down, or to throw sand in their gears. Because if we don't know where they're going, we can't put barriers in place to stop them. This is a problem that Republicans run into a lot, by the way. Republicans, because they do not listen to what anyone else says, or really they tend to have, and yes, I'm making a gross generalization right now, but to be really honest, I have just found this to be true about almost every single Republican that I've connected with over the past 2.5 years. They don't listen. They don't listen. And because they don't listen, they don't understand what the next move is, because they do not know what their enemies really care about. They do not know what their enemies' real goals are. And it's not as though their enemies are even hiding these goals. They're putting these goals out in plain sight in front of everyone. They talk about it openly. Literally, all that needs to happen is for people to listen, and they would understand exactly what's going on. But they don't. And so we're stuck in this place where one side pretends to be fighting back against the woke insanity, but they don't make any progress. And in fact, most of the time, they end up just making the problem worse than it was before they got there. You know, oftentimes I've equated Republicans and conservatives and MAGA people. And yes, I know those are all different groups, but I'm going to conflate them for the purpose of this analogy because I do think functionally they are the same in this regard. I've conflated them to the 3-year-old that's helping mom cook dinner at the end of the day. And the 3-year-old's in the kitchen. The 3-year-old feels like they're helping. They really do want to help mom. They want to help cook dinner like it's like a good thing. But what the 3-year-old does is ends up making a mess over in the corner while mom cooks the actual dinner. Nothing that the 3-year-old touches is ever actually going to make it into dinner because they're just making a mess over in the corner. They think they're helping. They want to help. They think they are. But mom really knows what's going on. Mom is cooking dinner on the counter. The 3-year-old is pretending they're cooking dinner just so they can feel like they had a part. And then the family's going to sit down and eat the dinner. And then after the 3-year-old goes to bed, mom is then going to have to go and clean up the mess that the 3-year-old made. That's effectively how I see most Republicans and conservatives and people in the MAGA movement when it comes to fighting back against the woke insanity. I have no doubt that they want to help. I have no doubt that they have positive intentions. But because they don't listen, and they don't really understand their enemy, and they don't have a flexible mindset where they can even comprehend that there are different people in the world that see things differently, that have a different perspective, that have different values, they cannot effectively fight back because they do not understand that not everyone shares their values, and their values are not objectively better. They might be better for them, but for other people, their values are worse. The values that you hold are unique to you, and having a different person have a different set of values, it doesn't mean inherently that you're right and they're wrong, or that they're right and that you're wrong. It's just different. It's just different. But when you start to say, my way is the only way of doing things, my values are the only right way to see the world, well, then you're shutting your brain off to why other people might do things differently. And in order to fight back against the woke insanity, we need to understand what their values are. And if you have shut your brain off to understanding that different people have different values, they care about different things, they're going to do things in different ways. It doesn't make them better than you, it doesn't make them worse than you, but they are different. And you cannot understand someone until you reach that base conclusion that it is okay to have a different perspective in the world. Because if you don't do that, then you're constantly going to be projecting your values onto them. That's part of the crux of the problem with Republicans and Republicans, conservative, MAGA movement. I'm using all three terms kind of in the same group. This is part of the problem with them because they truly believe that their worldview is the only worldview that matters. The only effective way to see the world. Their values are the values that every single person should hold, and no one should ever disagree with them ever. Now, some could argue that the woke left see the world the same way as the Republicans do, and I would agree. I would absolutely agree with that. I think the problem I'm describing in terms of not understanding someone else's values exists on both the left and the right. I think both of them do it. That's why I say that Republicans and Democrats are exactly the same. They are exactly the same. The problem is that I actually want the Democrats to be defeated. And some of the only allies that I have in this game are Republicans who cannot wrap their head around the fact that different people see the world differently, and that attacking people for having different values than you never wins you any points. It is not an effective way to fight this battle at all. And that's why the Republicans keep losing. That's why they've been losing the culture war for decades now. It's why why things haven't gotten better. It's why the intellectual dark web fixed nothing. Because they were focusing on their own values and then projecting their values onto other people, even though those other people that they were projecting onto don't hold their values to begin with. So, I wrote this essay last night that is one of the key things that I think people must understand in order to effectively fight back against the woke insanity. Let's read it. Their values are not your values. Their goals are not your goals. It's cliche to say, I didn't leave my party left me, but that's precisely what happened. It felt like I just woke up one day and didn't have anything in common with these people anymore. Or maybe they didn't leave me. Maybe I just thought my party had different values than it did. I don't think that's the case, though, because I do remember a time when they cared about free speech and understood what the slippery slope was. But did they really care? Or just pretend to care? That's the constant mindfuck of all of this. You never really know when it all started, the woke shit permeating culture and making the population into pod people. I think things were okay in the 90s, but maybe that was just nostalgia. I knew some of my professors were communists in college, and that was in the early 2000s. I actually took an international relations class my freshman year in college taught by Billy Corgan's uncle, and he taught us that communism was the most evolved form of society. Of course, he didn't offer any examples of any societies that had successfully realized that fully evolved form, but we all know that's just a technicality. But I'm pretty sure in college I was still allowed to do things like call things I didn't like gay and retarded. They took over the colleges a long time ago following Alinsky's rules. Then, once they had taken over the colleges, they convinced the population they needed those expensive pieces of paper in order to be successful in life. And once they made college a requirement, they were able to reach more young minds and create more people just like them. That's how you build a social movement. It starts with a single idea, and then the person with that idea creates more people with that idea by teaching it. And then they create more people with it, and so on and so forth. To build a social movement, you need teachers. And in colleges, they are untouchable. Why do you think tenure was invented? I got into a discussion with my husband tonight about the public schools, pointing out all the reasons they can't be fixed. He tried to poke holes in my arguments, and every time I was able to debunk them, he started to grow frustrated, not understanding how everything got so fucked up and why people would try to do this to the country. Remember, he's Ukrainian. He values it here more than most Americans because he knows what it's like elsewhere. Finally, I stood up and said, their goals are not your goals. Their values are not your values. It went something like this. But why would they destroy the schools? Why would they teach anti-racist math? Why don't they just have real mathematicians teach math, not teachers? Because they don't want an educated populace. They don't want people to think for themselves. They want a dumbed down populace. That makes them easier to control. The woke don't have the same goals we do because they don't have the same values we do. They value power above all else. In all the forms power comes in. They value it above a functional society. They value it above freedom. They value it above love. They will very literally destroy society if it means attaining more power. Because their values are different, their goals will be different. If your goal is to attain as much power as possible, you have to do that by taking actions to become more powerful. You become more powerful when you control more and get others in a place of subservience to you. You get others in a place of subservience to you when you take away their ability to think for themselves. You take away their ability to think for themselves by brainwashing them from the time they're 4 years old. So, of course, you'd want to destabilize the state educational system so you could take it over and use it for your own purposes, even if that means destroying the system with your foolishness because you value your own power above everything else. Their values are not our values. That's why their goals are not our goals. That's why it seems like they are speaking a different language and live in a completely different reality. Because they literally do. That's the end of the essay. You can find that essay over at redpilldiaries.substack.com. And I really hope that people pay attention to this. I really hope people take the time required to understand this concept. When we are fighting back against the woke insanity, and again, remember, woke just means authoritarian. We've talked about this before on the podcast. It just means authoritarian. It doesn't mean left. It doesn't mean right. You can be woke and be on the political left. You can be woke and be on the political right. But when it comes to fighting back against the woke, we have to fundamentally understand that they do not value the same thing we do. They do things that seem crazy because they do not value the same things that we do. They do things that we don't understand that make us want to pull our hair out, make us want to shout on the internet, because they do not value the same things we do. And because they do not value the same things we do, they do not have the same goals that we have. And no amount of screaming or crying or pointing out the hypocrisy of all of this is going to change the fact that they do not have the same values that we do. And that means they do not have the same goals we do. We can complain all we want. Complaining is not going to change it. I don't think that we can win this fight purely by relying on Republicans. Because Republicans generally have a completely inflexible mindset where they can only look at things at face value. There are two types of people in the world, people with a flexible mindset and people with a fixed mindset. And I'm not suggesting that one is necessarily better or worse than the other. Each has its benefits. So when I say that I don't think Republicans are going to be very good at fighting back against the woke, that doesn't mean I think that they're bad people. It doesn't mean that I think they're Nazis. It doesn't mean that I think that they have ill motives. It does mean that for this particular task, they are not well suited because they have a fixed mindset, a fixed, inflexible mindset where they are incapable of understanding the world from the perspectives of people who disagree with them. And the same is true on the left too. The exact same thing is true. I know what I'm going to hear from any Republicans listening to this. Go, what about the left, Karlyn? Because that's what they always do. Same is true of the left. I'm not talking about the left right now. I'm not using the left to fight back against the left. I'm talking about the ineffectiveness of the right in fighting back against the left. And they will not understand this. They will not grasp it. They will walk away from that conversation. Well, she just thinks she thinks she's just a leftist. That's actually exactly what I bet. There's going to be at least one Republican who listens to this podcast. They're going to go, she's just a leftist. That's what they always do. But it's not about being a leftist. It's about actually understanding your enemy. And people with rigid, inflexible mindsets are not capable of understanding the enemy with which they are fighting. Their values are not your values. Their goals are not your goals. Wishing upon a star that they saw the world the same way that you did is not actually going to make it true. Complaining on Twitter about their raging hypocrisy is not going to make them see the world the way you do. You have got to understand that there are different perspectives in the world. You don't have to agree with a perspective in order to understand that the perspective exists. You don't have to agree with someone or give up your values or change the way you see the world in order to understand that a different perspective does exist and that your perspective is not objectively better. It's not objectively better. It might be better for you, but for someone else, it might not be better. And unless you are a woke authoritarian, you don't want to force your worldview onto other people. I sure as heck don't. I don't care if people see the world the same way I do or not. But if you're trying to force your values onto other people to say, my way is objectively the best way to see the world, the best way to live life, then you are an authoritarian. If you want to make them see the world the way you do, you want to make them behave like you do, you want to make them say the words you want them to say and do the things you want them to do, that is woke authoritarianism, ladies and gentlemen, and it can happen on both the right and the left. And that is why it is necessary, it is critical that we wrap our heads around the idea that their values are not your values, their goals are not your goals, and no amount of complaining is going to change it. And until we understand that they see the world differently and how they see the world and what drives their behaviors and what are their motivations, what are their goals, what are they actually trying to achieve? We've covered this in a previous podcast. What the woke want is to gain as much power as possible, to destabilize the system, to attack capitalism, to usher in their little Marxist utopia. They value power above all else. They will very literally burn down your house if it gives them more power. They've done it before, they will do it again. And until we really wrap our heads around this, we are not going to be able to effectively fight back against them. That's reality. That's reality. All right, that's all I have for this podcast. If you are enjoying the Actively Unwoke podcast, you can find the full archives on activelyunwoke.com. It is also available on all major podcasting platforms. Please give it a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already. It really helps me out. And if you would like to support the work I'm doing, you can find many ways to do that over at activelyunwoke.com/support, including you can find ways to actually sponsor this here podcast if you'd like me to mention your website or your product or your service or anything else. Well, within reason, I do have veto power. I'm not just going to mention anything crazy. But I think most of you would probably be pretty reasonable. So if you would like to look at sponsorship opportunities or other ways to support my work, I really can't do it without you. I'm purely listener focused, subscriber focused, or subscriber funded, rather, because I don't want to be beholden to anyone else's ideas or political motivations. So if you value the work I'm doing, please consider supporting it. You can find ways to do so at activelyunwoke.com/support. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you soon.